Hello, I am the Script Doctor and welcome to the channel. After last week's episode of getting that valuable SB19 data, what do you suppose Discovery finds out this week about the burn? Well, I wish I could tell you all about it, but unfortunately this week's episode is a filler. We get one new detail, and then are sidetracked with a meaningless mission that really didn't need to be the focus of an episode. So, let's take a look at this sorry excuse for writing that is Star Trek Discovery, Episode 308, Sanctuary. We open with Georgiou challenging Dr. Culber's recommendation to help her with the blackouts she's been experiencing. Culber speculates on various types of loss of cognitive functions and demands that Georgiou let him help her. There's a throwaway line about having children, but I suspect Adira will be filling that gap in his relationship by season's end. Burnham is present for the first stage of the examination, where Culber is using the new Federation technology to scan Georgiou on an atomic level. While Georgiou makes terrible jokes and assumptions with regards to deconstruction, Burnham reinforces her loyalty by saying she won't leave her side.
So we're gonna figure this out. I'm not leaving until we do.
Then, 10 seconds later, says this.
Why don't I check in later?
Don't bother.
I'll call for you if you're needed.
Wow, that has got to be a record for in-scene backpedaling for this show. Burnham has to leave Sickbay because Book is looking for her. He just got word from his brother back home that something bad is going down with Osira. She's the leader of the Emerald Chain that runs a part of the galaxy. Book thinks it's serious because he hasn't heard from his brother in 15 years and desperately wants Burnham to come with him to help. Really? Just Burnham? He does know he's among Starfleet officers and the Federation, and that they have a habit of thwarting Osira's selfish plans for some time, right? Should he not be asking for Burnham's help by using her connections to request assistance for his home planet? Silly me, I thought this was a Star Trek show. Of course, he's not going to consider asking for Starfleet's help. Burnham still has that Messiah complex, so he's going to take advantage of that while he still can. Luckily, after last week's episode with her mother laying down some knowledge about Burnham's flaws, Burnham decides to take Book's concerns to Admiral Vance. Book lays out his case, claiming that the burn didn't just destroy starships but also damaged subspace to a point where it shifted the moon of his home planet into a different orbit, and the tidal changes caused sea locusts to leave the ocean and feast on their harvest. Wow, there's a lot of nonsense in that. Subspace is somewhat undefined in Star Trek for a number of reasons relating to real physics and story needs. Subspace anomalies were frequent in Star Trek Voyager, and they played havoc with normal space. As for the burn also affecting subspace, that is an entirely different issue. Because if the burn damaged subspace, would that not create issues with warp travel beyond the means to achieve warp? Warp is traveling through subspace, and if the dimension one is traveling is damaged, it would be like driving on a road full of potholes. Probably worse, because if you hit one of those, you'd most likely be hurled into normal space if not destroyed. But the moon's orbit and tidal changes? I know a little bit about this from my love and interest of Space 1999. Yes, if the moon shifted in orbit significantly enough, it would have a detrimental impact on the planet. But what troubles me isn't really that, but the introduction of sea locusts. Their description alone suggests that the sea is a preferred environment, so why would they leave that environment to go on land and eat when presumably they have an ample food supply in the sea? Did the moon's change in orbit somehow destroy the sea locust's food supply? Also, they can live outside of water, so are they really sea locusts or just normal alien locusts? Like with everything in Star Trek Discovery, it's an undeveloped idea that brings more questions that are never addressed because frankly, the writers haven't given it any thought. What they did put some thought into is the relationship the planet has with Osira. Apparently, she developed a form of repellent that compels the sea locusts to return to the ocean and save their food supply. The only payment she demanded was in the form of transworms, those creatures we saw in the first episode. Now, there is speculation that Osira is coming back to Book's homeworld, but the reasons aren't yet known. Vance is occupied with tracking 50 star systems on the verge of collapse because of Osira, and doesn't want to risk Discovery's spore drive for an investigation. Are you kidding me? Are we really to believe that after a 3-week refit and however much time has passed since then, that the Federation doesn't have the means to replicate the spore drive on other ships? I would figure due to the scarcity of dilithium and the urgent need for Starfleet to provide aid, upgrading all of their ships with spore drives would be top priority. Regardless, Saru suggests sending Discovery in as an observer in the hopes that the presence of a Federation ship may open diplomatic relations with the Emerald Chain. Vance agrees to this for some reason, but puts in a stipulation that they are to leave if there is any chance of danger toward Discovery. Oh, Vance, by this time you should know they're going to find a workaround on that order.
I'm not betting on diplomacy. You have no idea what Osira is capable of.
So how about giving him a briefing on that, huh? It would be wise to make sure the captain of the ship you're ordering into enemy territory knows as much about the enemy as possible. No? You're just gonna let him play it by ear? Alright. On the salvage world we saw last week, Tolor tries to justify to his aunt Osira why he botched up the planet he was running, but she doesn't care for his excuses. She lost her favorite Andorian, Rin, and as a result she teleports her nephew Tolor to be eaten by a transworm. Tolor is feasted upon far more violently than what we saw in the first episode. He isn't swallowed whole like those other goons or Burnham, but chomped at, with his legs falling away from his torso. And this scene is to set up that Osira is a ruthless tyrant, willing to kill family in order to get what she wants. It's very paint by numbers. You've got the subordinate apologizing and the tyrant accepting the apology and killing them anyway. What is strange is that it wasn't done with any witnesses. No one to see this violent act and take it as an example of what will happen if you fail Osira. So if anyone's looking for Tolor in the future, they're going to have to do some investigation of their own if they're not brave enough to inquire with the boss lady. On Discovery, Tilly is updating Saru on the ship's operations. Apparently Linus, the Saurian, is having his yearly shed and has been confined to quarters after an incident in the mess hall. So, Linus is a jerk? Tilly remarks that this is an annual part of his life, so he should know when it is going to happen, and instead of taking the necessary and respectful actions, he ignores responsibility and socializes with the crew as his skin flakes off in their face and food? It's obvious that the writers are trying to make this a comedic element, but they're looking more at the punchline and not the context around the setup for in-universe believability. What I found odd with this scene, aside from the Linus commentary, is that Tilly, who is acting first officer, is not really acting like a first officer, but more like what I mentioned in my previous review, a captain's yeoman, an assistant to help organize tasks for Saru. In fact, a part of this scene confirms my suspicion when Saru inquires about his choices for confirming an order.
We have narrowed it down to execute, hit it, and manifest.
Hit it was Captain Parks.
Yeah, but you could put your own spin on it, like, hit it!
First, I thought this was the Star Trek parody. And second, are they stealing jokes from that parody?
Really gotta think of something cool to say when we're going to warp. Something like, it's warp time!
They head to the Spore Lab where Stamets has compiled the data and made a discovery regarding the burn. The team has found a point of origin, a deliberate signal being sent from within a nebula. The signal carries an audio transmission, and when the distortion is cleared, they reveal the melody to that lullaby we heard earlier in the season. Saru hears something in the transmission and asks for some variables to be adjusted, and when done, they find the root signal pulse and recognize it as a Federation distress call. So a Federation ship has been trapped within this nebula for over 100 years. That's a nice little reveal, and also setting up that the Federation itself may be responsible for the burn and the state of the galaxy. Stamets volunteers Adira to write an algorithm that can decode the transmission, but they're a Starfleet vessel within the current Federation. Should they not have those decoding algorithms in their computer anyway? Why would they have to write a new one? Say it with me now. Because the script said so. After setting up an action plan, Adira reaches out to Stamets and asks that he refer to her by her preferred pronouns of they or them. She delivers this request rather awkwardly, as if even in this time such a reveal is not normalized. We discover that Adira never felt like a she or her. This would be prior to the symbiont, and for some reason the only other person Adira told this to was Gray. And this moment is how you know the writers are terribly disingenuous when it comes to this topic. You see, Star Trek had this amazing ability to normalize what in the past would have been considered awkward or uncomfortable. The discussion of ethnicities is a good example, as the show was airing during the Civil Rights Movement. When a facsimile of Abraham Lincoln meets Uhura for the first time and speaks in a way he thinks is inappropriate, Uhura's response isn't to be offended, but to remark that times have changed for the better, and she doesn't say it with an awkward fashion, but with confidence and courtesy. But here in Discovery, Adira's behavior would suggest not much has changed with society in that regard since the 21st century. Stamets' response to her request is far more Star Trek than how the request itself was made. A simple, okay. I'm a tad troubled and disappointed by the fact that they made the character with the Trill symbiont that has memories of multiple lifetimes also be a person without a specific gender identity, and make that not a factor as a result of the joining, but something that was in play prior. It doesn't feel as honest as it should. This is a 16-year-old human that is a host to a symbiont. That alone within the Star Trek universe takes many years to prepare for, so as to organize and maintain one's sense of self among the lifetimes within the symbiont. Adira is unprepared for that, so an interesting sci-fi position that could have been taken for this character would be a confusion of identity, which is also a struggle that some face prior to figuring out their preferred gender. This could have been done allegorically. They started by having Adira face a form of amnesia regarding who they were as a result of the joining. Now that everything is back in a more controlled order, there's a perfect opportunity to explore the flood of memories and life experiences that could cause confusion. Adira's journey to find oneself among those lifetimes and then gain more control would be a powerful change in this character that would feel more honest and maybe, if done well, relatable to those this character is being used to represent. The entire scene and character moment that occurred feels more like a throwaway instead of an important character moment. It's fleeting, and for myself as a writer, I see opportunities where this could be a strong B-plot of a story, where Adira knows deep down that she can decode this transmission, but other memories are getting in the way and she needs Gray's help as a Force Ghost to guide her through this journey. But that takes away screen time from Michael Burnham, so we can only throw Adira some scraps of time to point out something no one in the 32nd century should really care to object to. This same type of treatment is given to Detmer. She asked engineering to program in some failsafes on her console. Osoken tries to support her by saying that the console will reprogram itself to fit Detmer's needs, but Detmer doesn't want to rely on that. She wants something consistent and stable. Osoken tries to encourage her that she's alright and doesn't need a failsafe, but that is a terrible form of reinforcement. It's her pretty much saying, don't be cautious or responsible, you're perfect as a pilot and don't need any backups for any reason. What a terrible friend. I have friends that tell me I am a great writer, but none of them ever tell me to stop getting better, or not to prepare for anything I am getting involved in, because they know that type of attitude is not going to benefit myself or anyone I work with. To think that this content is coming from a writer of Star Trek, it shows that they're not only ignorant about the brand, but life itself, thinking that once you hit a certain point, that's it. You're done getting better. You've reached the level cap of life. It's disgusting. Moving on, the Discovery jumps to Book's planet. They're unable to establish communications, so Saru orders Burnham to accompany Book, assess the situation, and return to Discovery at the first sign of trouble. Before we get to the surface, we get another taste of Adira and Stamets playing a duet. We learn that Adira hasn't seen Gray, but still feels him and is having issues with feeling other memories within the symbiont as well. Holy it's a seedling of what I mentioned earlier. But we don't get any more of that. Instead, we move along to get a brief tidbit of information when Rin demands to speak to Saru and leave the ship, only to have reservations when he learns that in 15 minutes, Osira's ship will arrive. Finally, we get to the planet's surface, and Book uses his animal communicating powers to disperse the sea locusts that are floating in the air. They don't wander very long before they are surrounded and taken away by Book's brother, Kahim. The two have a back and forth regarding Book having left the planet, but my understanding from the first episode is that because he's some type of mutant that can communicate with animals and plant life, he was cast out. Was that a lie? Or did the writers forget the society of his homeworld?
My family are killers, poachers. Every so often, one like me shows up in the gene pool. I'm not welcome, but I wouldn't trade who I am for anything. I wouldn't want to be different.
With what we're getting in this scene here, it's less like he was unwelcomed and more like Book took off for personal reasons. The conflict in question relates to Rin, that Andorian. Osira wants him back, and Kahim wants Book to give him back so Osira can provide what they need to save their planet. Osira's ship arrives in orbit and opens a channel demanding Rin's return. Saru doesn't want to give him up. So we have this setup of two different parties wanting the same thing, one for reasons unknown, the other for reasons of saving their people. Kareem's reasons are valid and I like them. He's thinking not just of himself, but also his planet and those he's responsible for. We soon find out that when Book refuses to hand over Rin, that he too has that special gift of communicating with plant and animal life, and it further adds to confusion about why Book left the planet. Apparently it had nothing to do with his mutant power as suggested earlier, but by sacrificing transworms to the Emerald Chain as payment for locust repellent. Osira threatens to destroy the people on the surface if Saru doesn't give up Rin, and she also reaches out to Kahim to have him hand over Book and Burnham. When both parties refuse, she opens fire. This kicks off an action set piece where Book and Burnham run to the shield emitter to conduct repairs, but never get to it because of two reasons. One, the production didn't build that set, and two, Kahim's squad finds them and demands their surrender. Saru knows he can't open fire on Osira's ship without starting a war between the Federation and the Emerald Chain, but luckily, Tilly has an idea of using Book's ship to fire on Osira and have the Discovery claim plausible deniability. Detmer is assigned as the pilot, and Rin goes with her to provide tactical details on Osira's ship. This moment of Detmer is to convey that she's overcoming whatever issue she's had with her piloting skills earlier by going full manual and pretty much letting loose over Osira's ship. She compliments Rin for being a good co-pilot, but he's hardly doing anything in the way of piloting. He's not even a backseat driver at this point. He's only there to say, "Fire here," and freak out over a giant cat. They achieve their goal and disable Osira's ship. She leaves after threatening Saru that the Emerald Chain will be engaging with the Federation after this altercation. With Osira gone, Kahim has no reason to hand over Book or Rin, and no means to save the harvest and keep his son and family alive. Burnham suggests that the two of them use their mutant powers to send the sea locusts back to the ocean. While they don't think they're strong enough, Burnham does have an idea. She decides to use the same technique that Discovery used last season with the Kelpians to force them into their transformation, suggesting that they use Discovery as a conduit for Book and Kahim's empathic requests. The two gather and chant for a few minutes as Discovery sends out an amplifying beam, and Bob's your uncle, the sea locusts leave the land. In the mess hall, Detmer brags about her piloting skills, and Rin informs Tilly that the reason Osira wants him back is because he knows that the Emerald Chain is running out of dilithium and will no longer be able to maintain power.
Bum bum bum.
That story thread, I suppose, will be picked up in a later episode because we immediately hop into the corridors where Kahim is carrying his son on a tour of discovery. Burnham borrows the kid for a moment to go pick skin off of Linus, because that's not invasive or gross. Book does go through something of a character arc in this episode. After reconciling with his brother and sending intentions that he plans to visit more regularly, he decides that he wants to join Starfleet because the Discovery helped him save his planet. Normally I'd say it's not going to be that easy, but this is Star Trek Discovery, so expect to see Book in some type of uniform within the next episode or two. We get another short moment where Stamets shows pride in Adira towards Culber, and they're really nailing home that surrogate family concept here. And while I like the idea of these three coming together, what disappoints me is how it's only these three that are interacting in the series, at least thus far. It's really odd to see the crew so compartmentalized. You've got Burnham with Book, you've got Saru with Tilly, and you have Stamets with Culber and Adira. I want to say you kind of have Culber with Georgiou, but there's no real chemistry there, and her subplot of dying for some odd reason is just as thin as the writer's efforts to make us get to know the rest of the crew on the ship. It's quite frustrating that this is another filler episode, especially when the opening has that nice setup for exploring the cause of the burn. In a normal Star Trek episode, this would be the A-plot, and the crew would be investigating further. But since this story doesn't involve Michael Burnham and the writers feel compelled to follow her at every turn, this interesting idea and story gets tucked away in exchange for a visit to Book's boring forest planet with CGI air mites and sibling rivalry issues. And that's really what the last 40-odd minutes of this episode was about. A single mission to convince Book to throw in with Starfleet and become a true believer like Burnham. And the fact that this change in character was the A-plot and we barely moved forward with the question that has been brought up in every episode thus far just goes to show that whatever the writers came up with for their endgame wasn't impressive enough to be the focus point of the season as a whole. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.